The next couple of sessions featured in this video were characterized by a lot of new things, so a lot of experimentation on my part as I figured things out, and actually just a lot of learning and success on Limra's part in that she just really took every new challenge, every new situation I threw at her, and proceeded to just think through it and figure it out and on to the next thing. That said, I always started, as you can see pictured here in these first couple clips, with reviewing basics, reviewing following of the shoulder, reviewing circling, reviewing circle sizes and changes to direction on the circle. These are all things that I always started with before I went on to all the new things. The big thing that we introduced this week was a second person in the round pen, or a rider and a handler dynamic. And this is how Terrell and I have started Young Horses for years now. We really like the rider to just be neutral in the beginning and the person on the ground be offering the horse all the guidance that they need as they learn to cope with the weight of the rider first. And it's only after they're comfortable with that that we start to have the rider actually take over giving the horse cues. So here my friend Abby came into the round pen and started, this is our just first moments with two people in the round pen. And I think the biggest challenge for Limra was figuring out which person she was supposed to be responding to and who she needed to ignore. And that was mostly just because she's never had two people in the round pen with her before. So she was a little bit nervous with Abby jumping up and down next to her. And you can see here, right in that first moment, she just decides to leave, which is fine. I just split my whips and I wave them until she funnels back in between the whips, which is a skill she's already very solid in. And then we rubbed on her and started again. And this is kind of the interesting thing, because if we had had a halter and a rope on her, she would have been probably forced to stay. So I think it's kind of interesting that this bridleless start gives the horse that option to always leave and turn away if something feels uncomfortable to them or they're unsure about something. And here you can see another instance, so we practice this over and over again. Abby approaching, Limra staying tuned into me, Abby jumping up and down, similar to the movement that you would have, but over-exaggerated, obviously, when you're mounting and dismounting, and then she'd leave again. And so kind of getting used to having a person come next to her and move around in a funky way and then leave. And then we started having Abby stand, leaning one arm over her. You can see that here. And then me having her yield her hindquarters. So this was once again a skill we've done many times without someone hanging their arm over Limra's back. And so now we're just continuing it. And you can see there she drew backwards for a second, but once again, just whips in that V funnel and drew her back in. And this was pretty typical for this whole thing. She had little moments where she, backed up or turned away, but overall, she was just very open to listening to me. And here we started bellying up on her with Abby jumping and hanging on her. And then while Abby was hanging, what I ultimately started to do was actually ask her to yield the hindquarters with Abby hanging over her back. So you can see how we built very slowly and systematically, starting with the jumping, starting with hanging an arm over her, then bellying all the way up. And then from now the bellied up position, you can see I'm transitioning to having Limra yield just a couple steps with Abby's weight over her back. So these are kind of her first steps carrying the weight of a rider. Although Abby's not obviously fully astride, she's just hanging over her back. And we like to do it this way so that Abby can just slide off if Limra has a big reaction. Of course, it's a little bit awkward and silly looking, but it's just a very safe and easy way to get the horse accustomed to some of these things. And then here you can see Abby bellied up again. She got a lot of jumping practice this session, and then I actually changed things a little bit, and I actually draw Limra straight towards me. So you can see here I walked backwards and funnel her straight, carrying Abby's weight on her back. And she's like, "What's that? Hey, what are you doing there? This feels weird." Which I just love watching all of her expressions. She's just clearly like, "What in the world?" And then we walk forward a couple steps here as well. And you can see she's pretty hesitant, and the weight is having an impact on her movement. But overall, she was just down for it all, which was really fun to see and experience with her. So, one principle I find very important in training is always to separate out criteria before combining them. So, criteria could be carrying Abby's weight separate from the saddle, and then putting together having Abby draping herself over Limra with the saddle. And of course, Limra had already been introduced to the saddle prior to that. So, we took all these criteria, Abby, saddle, weight, and we finally started to put them together in this session. And Limra progressed really quickly when it came to combining these criteria together. And we were able to get to a point where she was funneling in between the whips quite confidently in both directions, circling the round pen. And then I was even to take that a step further and have her hang over Limra's back and start my first actual Liberty circle. So I put my whips on one side as opposed to the funnel position with the whips and started to proceed into my first Liberty circle with Limra carrying Abby's weight. And you notice Abby's feet are on my side of the horse, so if anything were to happen, she could once again just slide down and land on her feet. But in this way, Limra's experiencing having something, a person, on her back while circling for the first time. So that was no problem, probably because we successfully isolated and recombined all the criteria there. So really excited about that. As successful as these sessions were introducing a rider, I still felt like something was missing before we went further with a rider. And I thought that obstacles might be an interesting thing to try. So, just observing Limra in her daily life in the barn, myself and Terrell and Anna, our assistant trainer, have noticed that she can be quite spooky. So, I was thinking that by introducing obstacles, we'd have a real opportunity to just process some fear reactions and just kind of see how she and I did troubleshooting. And interestingly enough, I began with the quintessential tarp obstacle that can be very scary for some young horses. And I expected her to have a big reaction and have to work quite a while with her and troubleshoot and figure this out. And instead, she was downright curious, put her front feet on it very quickly, as you can see in this clip. I was able to stop and rub on her shoulder and offer her a little bit of reassurance, and then step back, as you can see here. And she went right on pawing the tarp with her front feet and then walked over it. And stopped and rubbed her again and was like, wow, how could this be so easy? She kind of nibbled my jacket a little bit. I walked backwards and she walked all the way over it. So kind of interesting, and I progressed opening the tarp up bit by bit, creating a larger surface area for her to cross. And she had moments of hesitancy or moments where she definitely, as she is here, wanted to stop and explore it. So moments of curiosity, really. But no big fear reactions, just kind of mild interest and checking things out. And I always just worked her over the obstacles by circling and using all the same tools that I've built up throughout these sessions. And then I tried moving the tarp. So you can see here, I just drew her towards the tarp as I drug it and walked backwards with my whips in one hand. And she was a little nervous. You could see she was a little bit more up as I started to move it. And of course, the tarp makes a big noise as it drags along the ground. But you can see she starts to almost get a little bit like brave to the tarp, and that she's like, ooh, I can chase this, and this is kind of like my Liberty circles, and I can do this. And then she starts walking towards it very calmly and confidently, and here she even steps on it a little bit. So you can really see just a very curious and open and brave horse, which, just as I said, was not what I was expecting going into this session. And I think that's interesting because I think that is perhaps one of the benefits. This is a trial of one horse, so we would have to do further experimentation. But I think this is one of the benefits to doing all this stuff at Liberty is that the horse knows they can always run away, and they've been taught to process their emotions in a different way right from the start. And so even when you bring into the round pen or start to bring in the round pen things that are very traditionally scary, they just have a very good framework for learning to explore it. And because of this draw that you establish at Liberty, this draw towards you first, but then it can be later towards a tarp, you just create a very different mindset in your horse. So just very interesting observations that definitely all the wheels in my brain were turning as I observed her with these different obstacles. And you can see here I'm very slowly starting to rub her on the shoulder with it. And she had some minor reactions, but overall was very confident. And then I went on and just proceeded to do the same thing with our proprioceptive mat, or it's just really a gym mat. And she was once again a little hesitant at moments, definitely pawed it and explored it with her nose, but then went right to walking over it, and I was able to work her around it. I had a slightly different approach with the mat, and I ended up doing more changes of direction around it, and you can see here I'm actually in the following at the shoulder position as she went over it. So I had to do a slightly different approach, but all still within that same framework that I have built up with all these sessions before this in regards to these just basic exercises: circling, following at the shoulder, which would be the equivalent if you had a halter to lunging and leading beside, but just doing all that at Liberty. And I feel like she was a bit more nervous, ironically, about the mat than the tarp. And I think that might in part have been due to the fact that it's a very unstable surface, and that can be disconcerting, especially to young horses that are stepping onto it the first time. So I think that was kind of a sensory experience for her. But once again, she was able to walk over it and stand on it, and just overall did great. Another thing I wanted to mention from this set of sessions was this reaction that she had while I was practicing bellying up. And it was a reaction that was a very unhappy reaction. It almost looked like she was going to lift her back and buck or reach back and bite me. She was pinning her ears, tensioning up her back, rocking onto her hind legs. It was a very negative reaction. She did it again here, where she's just clearly either in pain or just very dissatisfied with how I'm bellying up on her. And so Terrell had the idea to just get a stool and practice from there instead. And she was instantly much happier about that. I think she was just tired of me being clumsy and kind of hitting her back as I was jumping up. And so then from the mounting block, we practiced the same thing, hanging from my belly and also swinging my leg over her butt. And both of those things went really well. And I think it was actually fortuitous because it also helped introduce her to that feeling of the rider's leg swinging over her rump, which was a really good thing to kind of cover in these sessions as we're introducing that weight of the rider and that mounting and dismounting process. So very interesting set of sessions, lots of progress being made by Limra and lots of interesting things being learned by me. I hope you enjoyed. Feel free to become a member at Doctor.horse. Otherwise, really appreciate a like and subscribe. Thanks, you guys.